Thanks, everybody. So I'm mostly going to talk about OntoChoice, which is a project that is started as a white paper and is growing. And the motif is the kinds of evaluations you have to do if you're going to choose terms and ontologies. I have a couple of links here in different formats. The slides, I pasted the link into the chat. So you can visit anytime. At least I hope you can. And um, our presence shows up in a couple of different places, a fair number of different places. Um, the primary one functionally being the white paper itself, which is the OntoChoice-WP link, the bit.ly link in the upper right. But also there's a GitHub site, also there's a website, also there's other things. Um, so um, I'll talk briefly about what my projects are. They all tie in a little bit to the OntoChoice. And there might be other things in there that also become relevant over the discussion or in what you are doing. I'm half-time at the San Diego Supercomputer Center with Christine Kirkpatrick and the Go Fair US team. And our primary activity involves consulting with NIH, NIAID specifically, OddSet specifically in NIAID about how to make NIAID repositories more fair. And that's actually been a pretty successful consultation. It's a great data team at NIAID. I highly recommend if you ever get the chance to work with them. But uh, so that's a lot of guidance and evaluation of the repositories, and then a certain amount of freelancing or whatever the word is, thinking up how to evaluate repositories for being fair and how to share that information and so on. Then I'm the project lead of this OntoChoice project that we're about to talk about. I'm the group chair, co-chair for the RDA VSIG interest group, and I still manage the ESIP Community Ontology Repository and the MMI Ontology Registry and Repository. So you can always contact me on any of those topics. I love to talk. Um, oh. I'm going to tell you some things you already know as a way of setting up what I where I fit in. Um, and I stole some of this material from various sites, semantic harmonization pages that I saw. So if your problem is to disseminate the best practices for harmonizing semantic resources, and are proposing a systematic set of best practices using web architecture and methods to enable the mapping between different but related terminology systems. I thought, what does that look like? I'll just ask ChatGPT. As it turns out, or I asked Google for images that relates to semantic terms and harmonizing semantic terms and semantic resources. No, they don't know what that is. But, oops, wrong page. I found, this was the best one I found for semantic mapping. And obviously that's not really a mapping, it's just really a drawing of the particular terms. So I found another one. I thought I would show you that I understand what semantic mapping is. There you go. I've mapped the semantics. And really the part that we're most involved with is in the area where I believe it was Pierre De Luigi, Pierre Luigi, who said, uh, you may consider using these vocabularies that exist or collaborating to extend them or developing your own. And it'll depend in part on the review of vocabularies and requirements and desired modeling approaches. And I thought, yes, that's a great answer because the most asked question in semantics is how do you, for me, has been, how do you choose which ontology to use or how do you choose which term to use? And in your case, I think it becomes a question of how do you choose which term to use for mappings. In the things, some of the projects that you're doing, I think that dissolve that problem, so to speak, maybe goes away to a certain extent. You can educate me a little more in this conversation. Um, but in any event, the answer in the broader scheme of things is always it's going to depend on a lot of things. Um, and so the answer, the look that I get, the reactions I get are not really excited to hear that. It hasn't, I haven't gotten any helpfulness points for saying it depends. And so this led to my thinking about how can we solve this problem. And it's not so much that OntoChoice has figured out how to solve this problem, um, but it makes you think, okay, well, how can you crisply answer the question of choosing terms and ontologies, or answer it in general? And one way, of course, that we do it now, but we didn't do it when I was facing this 5 years ago, is to ask ChatGPT or ask Chrome or ask anything on your computer the same question, and actually gives some pretty decent answers, at least up to a point. It breaks things down fairly nicely. I realized I might be getting a slightly biased answer, so I realized all of the tools are things I've worked on or led or used a whole lot. Um, and so went through some exercises with being more anonymous, and I got somewhat more generic answers. Unfortunately, DuckDuckGo, also the Go.ai, told me that how to build an ontology, really, which was not the question I asked. But um, the other kind of answer I got was that's from DuckDuckGo, is a whole bunch of information that was pretty much useless. Um, Eventually, I found a reasonable set of answers that it only had one of my projects in item in slot 10, so that was real progress. And they weren't bad instructions, as I said. They had the necessary steps, um, but they didn't really feel authoritative, and they also weren't very concrete. And both of those things I thought were a little frustrating. So we've been working since about 2020 on building the answer to this question, and maybe it's fair to say we started this building process from the detailed level up. Um, the first few years, the we involved was mostly me. You may have heard me present this work once or twice before in the distant or more recent past, and for the first couple of years, I would add a couple paragraphs or a half a page each time I would present it. And slowly, people started signing on and helping out and motivating me to do more, and presenting some of the work that they and I were doing. And so we've had a couple of posters and other presentations. And they've included what I call the gist of our answer, which is that there's a first step, which is the relevance, the rule out step, to say, is this relevant at all? Is this term relevant, or is this ontology relevant to what I'm trying to do? Mostly, and for you all, I think you often know which ontologies you're mapping. And so, yeah, you got that. And it's pretty obvious which terms aren't relevant. And so the choices can usually get easy. I saw a use case going by on Slack the other day that wasn't so easy. Um, but there may also be a requirement for certain other kinds of things. Suite, for example, doesn't have definitions, so maybe that's a requirement that it gets ruled out. Also, communities can say you have to use one of these ontologies, and that's a way of ruling it out, but you may still have choices to make. Once you've done the rule out around relevance, then there are all these other kinds of criteria. And what you see on this slide are just the categories for the criteria. Popularity and reuse categories, best practices, governance and internationalization. Um, these are all bases that people consider when they're deciding whether a vocabulary, probably any digital asset really, is useful for what they want. By the way, feel free to jump in and ask questions anytime. It's and argue and whatever. Um, so these other criteria, roughly speaking, I'd argue are evaluated in parallel and are weighted. And we may not do these with actual numerical weights, but in our minds, we're like, well, it's really important that it be heavily used, but it's not that important that it be fair, for example. Um, and everyone has different weights when they think about that. I actually did a little exercise to try to figure out what would be good generic weights for these different kinds of things. If we built a tool and it had these different sort of major and minor categories in it, um, how would you distribute the weights of what's important and less important? And the way I came up with weights was I took all of the use cases that we could think of for choosing a term or choosing a vocabulary, and for every category of selection criteria, I gave it an importance from 0 to 10. Um, and I asked a bunch of other people, of which one and a half other people did fill out the same. It's a really big spreadsheet, and it's really hard. It's what, 100 items or so to fill out? More, almost 200. Um, but that's why all these numbers are not round numbers. Is you're seeing the average of the responses in these different categories. And the spreadsheet's still open and still accumulating data. So if any of you are interested in either looking more closely at it or filling it out, both are encouraged. You can look at the link here. Um, and you don't see a lot of differentiation, but it's interesting to realize that sometimes there's a really strong correlation with certain criteria and certain questions or use cases you might want to use it for. So getting to the actual work, you can tell from the page numbers here that we have a significant chunk of writing towards a paper or some papers, or at least something useful for the community. Um, the organization is basically the same organization you saw on that diagram. Different categories are the major sections, and the codes there go from more green to more yellow and red. The more green it is, the more done the section is, and the red with the whole circles are completely missing. Occasionally there are notes in them, but they're mostly missing. So um, that gives you an idea of the status of things. There's a fair amount of potentially useful material here for someone who really wants to see what's going on. Um, as we'll get into shortly, we're running into a time limit in terms of the number of people who are thinking about this, writing about this, and building tools about this is increasing. And so we're looking to accelerate toward some sort of concrete outcomes. Um, there are a couple of things we're not doing. We're not saying how much you can find, or saying much about how you can find the terms and ontologies. We're not describing how to create an ontology. We're not talking about how you can create or find ontologies with LLMs or AIs. Um, and it's all done by volunteers. So the volunteers, of course, do not know everything there is to know, and things are starting to change kind of quickly. Why did we want to do this? We wanted a community to contribute to some kind of authoritative or valuable, at least, publication. Um, could be published as a white paper, could be as an actual formal publication in a journal, um, could be broken out in pieces and different pieces published. We're still working that out, but certainly the white paper is there to look at and add to and respond to. It's definitely a community effort. Um, we my one of my secret goals is that if you make a list of what important criteria are, more people will start building tools that actually evaluate those criteria. I've worked a lot with BioPortal, led that project. I've worked with some other choice tools and so forth. There just aren't many good tools at all for evaluating terms and evaluating ontologies in a way that people would find useful. Um, so ideally, some tools or libraries can start coming out of this. Um, obviously we'd like people to understand better the factors to consider when they're trying to choose terms and ontologies. One of them may be more important for them than they realize. And then if we can come up with an elevator pitch that answers the question, that would be great too. I don't know if see our website or see our white paper counts, but I think being able to be clear about techniques and tools and have more mature tools will be really good. So you can see we have a fair bit of a team now. All of these people are involved at various levels. It's very much voluntary, the involvement. Um, we are targeting a position paper to say what we're doing and how the community is involved and how they can get involved. That's targeted for release in a few months. Lots of presentations, including this one. It'll come up at my part of the ESIP semantic technology presentation next week. I'll be at RDA in October, and we'll probably say some things about there. We have a number of representatives who are leading ICBO or will be at ICBO, and I think some may go to SWIC as well, but may or may not be talking about it. So we're getting out there. Um, there's an exemplar tool that's sort of fun to look at, but doesn't do too much yet that I know of. I saw it a month or so ago. But it's just to show how some metrics can be evaluated. And then it would be nice to move the white paper and have it as a reference document that people can do that. So I go back in and write more in it every month or so, sometimes a lot, sometimes a little. And it's a fairly significant document. How do we do this? Well, those of us who can make it that particular session will meet every other week. It's always less than an hour, sometimes just half an hour or so. We each contribute what interests us and what we're best able to contribute. If you want to be a named author, you have to actually contribute to the white paper. That's my rule because my whole reason for this project is to have the white paper. And we have a whole bunch of tools set up now, all team ready and organized. And we're getting so close to having a logo. Well, we have ideas. And so we'd love for people to join us or encourage other people to join us or, yeah, just check it out and use it as you will. These are the logos. I'll be happy to take votes now about which ones are terrible or great. And the links again, if you want to go back to it. I think that's my last slide. Yeah, it is.